Miraculous Ladybug is a show about two love-struck teenagers, Adrien and Marinette, who are secretly superheroes Ladybug and Cat Noir, protecting Paris from the infamous hawk moth seeking to gain their Miraculous, in which grants the power to make a wish that could reshape reality. These Miraculous, of course, are the Ladybug earrings and black cat ring. Creation and destruction, in other words. Without one, the other cannot exist. And as interesting as all of that sounds, unfortunately this aspect of the show, i.e. the lore, hasn't really been explored all that much. So I think I speak for majority of people in the fandom when I say a lot of us are still watching the show, mainly because we formed some sort of attachment to these two characters, Adrien and Marinette. The entire show is built around the love square, where the characters are in love with one another, but only one version of each other. Marinette has a huge crush on her classmate supermodel Adrienette, yet Adrien, who is Cat Noir, is madly in love with Ladybug. And in order for us to understand why their dynamic is so compelling, we first need to take a look at their individual characters and how and why their interactions are the way they are. We've already talked about why Adrien is the holder of the Black Cat Miraculous by unraveling the layers to his complex character, and we've explored why Marinette was chosen to be the holder of the Ladybug earrings. Hopefully from those two video essays we can see how complex both of them are in different ways. Now we're kicking off February with another banger, brought to you by the one and only your girl, the cartoon Hotspot, where in today's video essay we'll be discussing the many ways Adrien and Marinette mirror each other. So if you're new to my channel, welcome, and for returning subscribers, welcome back. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and to ensure you don't miss any video essays from me, click that bell button for post notifications. Without further ado, let's begin. As I previously stated, the entire show revolves around the love square, and in a later video I may discuss the complexity of the love square and why it's so integral to the series. Because it's the same people, but each individual ship within the square has a completely different dynamic. But I digress. In what ways do Adrien and Marinette mirror each other? First, I'd like to define mirroring, because it's important to note that it doesn't simply mean opposing. Mirroring also considers how two characters complement and balance each other out. It's easy to list off all of Adrien and Marinette's differences, but hardly when scrolling through Tumblr blogs and essays on Reddit do people point out their similarities, which, to be honest, I don't blame. The show itself emphasizes their differences, so it's hard to pick out their similarities. But that doesn't go without saying, their similarities are there. It's what makes them whole, yin and yang. The purpose of this video essay is not so much just to list off all the ways they mirror each other, but to explore why they work so well together, why their endgame. Adrien and Marinette rely on each other from an emotional standpoint, yes, but also a plot mechanism and from a character development point of view. It's to explain why certain things have happened the way it's happened. Why, for instance, Marinette makes certain decisions that Adrien would never make and vice versa, and how they move the plot forward. So briefly back to my point on the love square. I think it's genius, and not because there are shipping wars over the same people. What I find fascinating is how these characters present different sides of themselves depending upon which ship it is. The obvious differences appear most when it's the parent ship, so Ladynoir and Adrienette. Different dynamics but the same people. Their similarities come when we look at Marichat, the bridge between Ladynoir and Adrienette, and of course Ladrien, where mutual romantic feelings exist. Gosh, this show gives me such a headache. My point is, there is a certain way Ladybug would behave when we're looking at Ladrien, but would not so much act as Ladynoir. The same applies for how Adrien acts around Marinette, but is completely different with Ladybug, and it's not because of their crush. Both, however, show all of their sides to their truest selves as Marichat. If you've seen my video on the symbolism of the moon, I briefly spoke about Adrien and Marinette being yin and yang, Marinette being the yin and Adrien is the yang. Of course, this doesn't just mean they're strictly yin and just yang, because as we've seen, certain character traits swap depending upon which form they take, i.e. civilian or superhero form. Most obviously though, we have creation and destruction and good luck and misfortune. Ladybug wields the power of creation and good luck, whilst Cat Noir wields the power of destruction and bad luck. Interestingly enough, it can be said that Marinette often encounters experiences of bad luck as Marinette. Likewise, on the outer surface, meaning if you don't consider Adrien's terrible home life, you'd say he's fortunate. He has money, he's rich, he's famous, but like I said, outer surface. Another way they mirror each other is through how they show affection, and I'm actually going to bring this up later again on when discussing another trait. But anyways, Adrien/Cat Noir shows affection through physical touch, whether it's through encouraging Ladybug when she's at her lowest or when she's at her best. Marinette, on the other hand, shows her affection through gifts because it means she can incorporate her creativity into something she cares about. We've discussed why Marinette was chosen to wield the Ladybug earrings. Her creativity is what gives her the edge over her opponents. Creating is what she does, what she enjoys, so of course that's going to translate into showing affection. For example, when she made that gift for Miss Bustier, when she designed a scarf and beret for Adrien. I can continue listing them off, but you get my point. Keep this in mind because I'm going to explain how this translates to her character flaw. Remember when I said certain characteristics swap depending upon if Adrien and Marinette are in their civilian or superhero form? Well, it can be argued that as Marinette, she tends to be impulsive and hot-headed, whereas Adrien is the calm to her storm. Oftentimes, Marinette thinks with her heart and not her mind. She makes brash decisions solely based on impulse without thinking things through if it's the best possible route to take. The most obvious example I can think of is the episode Chameleon. Both Adrien and Marinette are the only ones aware of Lila being a compulsive liar. As Marinette is watching from afar, she catches on to one of Lila's lies and is about to expose her, but Adrien is the one to stop her from doing so.
But do you really think exposing her will make things better? If you humiliate her, she'll just be hurt more. Making a bad guy suffer has never turned them into a good guy.
And this actually ties into another trait where one of them is emotionally mature for their age, whereas the other is somewhat immature. And this isn't slander or anything, it's just me stating the facts, and that's okay. They're 14, they're allowed to be immature so long as they learn from their mistakes. I really think the fandom should cut them some slack and stop judging them as adults when they're not, and start judging them as teenagers. I'm not saying Marinette is always impulsive. I'm just saying sometimes her emotions get the better of her and she causes even more problems for herself. Referring back to Chameleon, Adrien was correct in saying making a bad guy suffer doesn't turn them into a good guy, and it's true. As frustrating as it is, I have to hand Agreste his flowers. He's the one to tell Marinette to back down, probably because he knows she's only going to get hurt. We love a protective king, don't we? But also there's a parallel. Silencer. In the scene where Bob Roth is about to get exposed, Cat Noir tells Ladybug to wait so that Bob Roth can confess on live television and Kitty Section can finally get justice. But Ladybug, thinking with her mind and putting aside sentiments, even when she has every right to be mad at Bob, says to Cat Noir, it isn't justice, that's revenge. And that there's no point forcing out an apology when he doesn't sincerely mean it. So yeah, as Ladybug and Cat Noir is the one rushing to a fight and not thinking things through, compared to Ladybug, who often has to tell him to calm down while she comes up with a solution that ensures nobody gets hurt. And this brings me nicely onto a point where I mentioned earlier about one of them being emotionally mature and the other immature. The next point I do have to put a trigger warning, as I will be talking about abuse, specifically parental abuse towards Adrien, and I briefly mentioned Kagami and Chloe, so viewer discretion is advised. I would say both Adrien and Marinette have had their moments, have had their angry outbursts and whatnot. When it comes to their civilian form, I'm of the opinion that Adrien is pretty mature for his age. And I'm not saying 14-year-olds can't be mature. I'm just saying Adrien is significantly more mature than his classmates. And I'm excluding Alia here because Alia is super mature. I mentioned in my Adrien Agreste video that when life shows you the worst side of itself, you're kind of forced to just mature quicker than the rate at which you should. Because you've seen and experienced things that other kids won't have had, and so you're adept to certain situations you may encounter and would know how to approach it. I wouldn't say it gives you an edge, but at the same time it kinda does. Apart from Chloe, Adrien is pretty much the only one in their class who suffers from having an overbearing parent who neglects their child's emotional needs. Again, to reiterate, how Adrien has turned out after suffering from abuse from his father is different to how Chloe and Kagami have turned out. There's no set way for how abuse victims should act and behave. It's not linear. They will show different behaviors because they're different people who have processed and are still processing it in a different way. Despite having every reason to be angry at the world, to be cold and to be distant to people he meets, Adrien is one of the sweetest and compassionate people in the show. He's mature in the sense that he's very patient with people who aren't deserving of his kindness. And this is solely due to how Adrien views his father. He gives his father the benefit of the doubt and sees him as this broken man who doesn't quite know how to grieve in a healthy manner, which unfortunately includes neglecting your son. And because of his perception of his father, he shows compassion towards Chloe and Lila. He constantly gives them chances, sometimes even defending them because he knows deep down they're just emotionally wounded kids. Even if he doesn't know the root of Lila's problems, he's mature to realize there is more to than just a compulsive liar. He understands that making up lies with each breath is her unhealthy coping mechanism for whatever internal issue she's dealing with. Though I will point out to say that although showing too much compassion can get you hurt and taken advantage of, I think Adrien knows when to draw the line, like when he warned Lila to not hurt his very good friend Marinette, and in Despair Bear when he told Chloe it's not that difficult to be nice to people, and even in Queen Banana when he ended their friendship because she still hadn't changed her behaviour. And with that being said, little disclaimer and a slight warning, just because I'm talking about Adrien in a certain way as opposed to how Marinette may behave, that does not give you the leeway to bash Marinette. No, just because Adrien is more mature, that doesn't mean Marinette is the most horrible person. Again, the fandom often sympathizes with Adrien and put themselves in his shoes, but are rarely ever doing the same for Marinette. Yeah, Marinette doesn't suffer from the same problems as Adrien, but she still has problems that shouldn't be glossed over to the point you're being insensitive. We always forget Marinette is a victim of bullying, and because of that, I'm always seeing comments on social media of how Marinette is, and I quote, mean to Chloe and Lila. I really need us to get rid of, and I mean burn, the idea that victims of bullying should treat their bully nicely. That's not how it works, because it's kind of hypocritical. Yeah, it's a cartoon, but some things that are explored in a cartoon do translate to our everyday life. I can assure you, 99% of us, when someone is being mean to us for no reason, we tend to hold a grudge, fight back passively. Why should we be nice to people who aren't nice to us? Prior to the Origins episode, it was stated that Chloe had been bullying Marinette for 4 years, probably even more. So of course that's going to affect the way Marinette views people, even if it's unintentional. Being bullied affects a person's self-esteem, especially being bullied as a child. You come to school, which should be a safe space for everyone, and then there's a bully picking on you. So yes, that's going to change your perception of people. Most commonly, you think everyone is out to get you, and to prevent that, to prevent yourself from getting hurt, you often lash out first. Think of it like, I'll hurt you before you get the chance to hurt me. It's a defense mechanism, and even so, Marinette has shown Chloe some patience, so let's start cutting her some slack. In Malek Dictator, the class was celebrating Chloe leaving Paris, whilst Adrien was the only one not to. When expressing her delight that her bully had finally left, she didn't stop to think how her words could have hurt Adrien, Chloe's childhood friend. Even when she had every right to be happy, perhaps she could have addressed her feelings with a little delicacy. Likewise, I do think that specific scene is a bit iffy because both Adrien and Marinette were kind of being insensitive towards the other, but you get my point. Furthermore, since this point is a long point, Marinette, or better yet Ladybug, lashing out at Lila in the episode Volpina is a prime example of how kids in that situation would act. Sure, maybe yelling didn't solve anything and perhaps made things worse, but it's Lila we're talking about. When Adrien was nice to her in Chameleon and told her in a gentle manner that he's there for her as long as she stops lying, she took it as if he was insulting her. And this isn't Lila's slander, but Lila has a lot of bitterness inside of her, so whether you yell or whether you don't yell at her, she's still going to take it personally. Anyways, let's try to understand why Ladybug shouted at Lila. When someone lies on your name, it puts you in an incredibly difficult and awkward and probably uncomfortable situation. Lila may not know who Ladybug is, but Ladybug is still a person behind the mask, Marinette. And because she's a person behind the mask, she's vulnerable, in the sense that Hawkmoth could use Lila to get to Ladybug. He already is. Unknowingly, he is using Lila to get to Marinette, who isn't aware is his sworn enemy Ladybug. If word got out to the press that Lila and Ladybug are friends, as she claimed, do you honestly think Hawkmoth wouldn't use this to his advantage? Of course he will. Who knows what lengths he'd go to? And I say this not because I'm exaggerating, but on the basis that when Hawkmoth discovered who the Guardian was, in order to get to Ladybug and Cat Noir, he practically kidnapped and held Master Fu hostage. And people often counter this argument with, Marinette used her powers for selfish reasons. She abused her powers. Okay, so by that logic, she was just supposed to yell at Lila as Marinette and not Ladybug? If anything, transforming into Ladybug made things better, as confronting Lila in her civilian form would have complicated the matter. And another argument I'm going to have to debunk and defend Marinette is Lila is the way she is because of Marinette. That's completely incorrect. The episode Volpina is proof that Lila has been lying for such a long time. It only worsened when someone who was smart enough to see she was lying rightfully put her in her place. Marinette, being rational to some degree, had to debunk and clear up that rumor straight away for her own safety and for Lila's safety. Should Ladybug have yelled? Probably not. Do I understand it was a perfectly normal response? Yeah. Would I have done the same thing? Absolutely. And ironically enough, the same people who expect Marinette to be so mature are the same ones who conveniently forget that she did apologize to Lila for overreacting.
Lila? Ladybug? I totally overreacted and never should have spoken to you like that. I'm sorry. Forget it, Ladybug. You were right. We'll never be friends.
So no, what we're not going to do is blame Marinette for Lila's behavior. Marinette isn't responsible for how Lila chooses to act. Likewise, she isn't responsible for how Chloe chooses to act. Marinette is only responsible for how Marinette chooses to act. Thanks for attending my TED Talk. By now, we're all used to me saying Cat Noir is offense and Ladybug is defense. And if I ever was the overthinker, I'd say it goes deeper than that. I don't think it's a coincidence that Cat Noir is offense and at the same time is usually the one to face things head on, whilst Ladybug is defense and often avoids confrontation and necessary conversations she needs to have. As I've stated numerous times, the black cat holder is tasked with the responsibility of protecting the ladybug holder at all costs. Because of this, Cat Noir's body often moves before his brain can process what he's doing. It's just instinct. We also see this with Adrien protecting Marinette. Instinctively, he protects her without thinking twice. He just does it. Heroes Day is a perfect example of that. And I like to think that's because they're yin and yang, so they're naturally drawn to each other in and out of the mask. Adrien might not know why he protects Marinette on instinct other than the fact he cares for her, but he does, without knowing she's Ladybug, the person he's tasked with protecting no matter what. Back to my point on offense and defense. Cat Noir is always engaging in the fight, occupying the akumatized villain, whilst Ladybug has enough breathing space to effectively think of how to put her lucky charm to use and save the day. Remember, mirroring encompasses how two people complement each other. They might be opposites, but it's part of the reason why they work extremely well together. Sometimes they don't even need to say anything. They can literally just communicate by giving each other a look, and they know what the other was planning to do. But as I mentioned, I think it plays into their character. Ladybug often fights at a distance, hardly getting close to the villain, and would much rather use her yo-yo at a distance, which symbolizes how she avoids confrontation. We often see her try to work around the problem rather than just dealing with it head on. This was stated in Gigantitan when she admits her plans are sometimes a little bit too convoluted, when really a straightforward and simple plan would work much more effectively. Let's take this one step further though. I did say I was going to bring up again how Marinette giving gifts as a way to show her affection plays into her character.
That's why I never get anywhere with boys. When things are really important to me, I get so scared that it won't work out that I can't help trying to control every possible outcome. I tell myself stories with wedding dresses and hamsters, and what people see is not Marinette opening her heart up.
There's nothing wrong with giving the boy you like presents and gifts and creating fantasies in your head. In fact, it's really cute, and as someone myself who's never in this world and is always stuck in my fantasy reality that sadly doesn't and will never exist, I have to say there comes a point where you have to eventually just do it, face things head on. Marinette even states that what people see, or rather what Marinette projects, isn't the Marinette who is true to herself and who opens her heart. It's the Marinette trying to establish control. By giving gifts constantly, she's playing it safe. It's an indirect way without her actually having to say the words, "I am in love with you, Adrien Agrest." Just like she always plays it safe as Ladybug. Sort of. Sometimes she can have the most ridiculous and dangerous plans, but I digress. When you have control, it means you're safe. You're on dry land. Marinette's entire arc is about her wanting control, when sometimes control is what's limiting her. Establishing control prevents any form of vulnerability because you're prepared for anything that could come your way. Unfortunately, that's just not how it works. In order to grow, you need to take some risks. Whether the outcome is good or bad, there's always something to learn. And what about Adrien? Adrien is very direct. Unlike Marinette, he wasted no time telling Ladybug how he feels, and he explains why.
It's funny, I'm kind of the opposite of you. I know that Ladybug's not in love with me, but I can't help telling her how I feel.
I think this is partly due to Adrien not being able to voice how he feels and what he wants at home. So when Adrien gets the opportunity to speak with his own voice and not that of his father, he takes it. He has seen firsthand that shutting people out and avoiding things, no matter how hurtful it is or how hurtful it may be, it doesn't solve anything and makes things worse. In the first Glass Theatre episode of season 2, Adrien had no idea if Ladybug would reject him or return his feelings, but he took that chance anyways and was happy with her response. He was happy he got it out of the way, because when you don't talk about something and get it off your mind, it literally starts to weigh you down. You feel a weight lifted once you've gotten out what you needed to get out, and this is also proof in Ephemeral. Adrien has always felt like if Ladybug knew his identity, he no longer has to hide one side of himself. He hates secrets because his whole family is full of them, even if he doesn't know entirely what the secret is. As soon as Adrien revealed his identity to Ladybug, he didn't even care that she hadn't revealed hers. He was just so happy to finally show her who he is. That's his way of trying to break away from the idea that Cat Noir and Adrien Agreste are two different people. Once he got that secret off his chest, he began to embrace both sides of himself and saw himself as one. Not just Cat Noir, not just Adrien, one in the same. One of my previous talking points of this video was about Adrien being emotionally mature, whilst most times Marinette can also be mature, but compared to Adrien, she's less mature. This ties into this point about Adrien being an empath, empathetic, whilst I'd argue that Marinette is sympathetic. Confession. I used to think both meant the same thing, and to an extent they do, but being empathetic is just one step further than what being sympathetic is. Empathy is the ability to not only just understand someone's feelings based on what they tell you, but the ability to put yourselves in their shoes so you feel exactly how they feel. Sometimes Marinette often finds it difficult to understand someone's feelings. That doesn't mean she's emotionally distant though. She just struggles to see why people feel the way they feel as opposed to how she may personally perceive a certain situation. For example, she hates it when people lie, whereas it's not so much that Adrien hates it, but he can understand why a person might choose to lie compulsively. In Guilt Trip, both Adrien and Marinette's strengths come through. Adrien understood that Juleka wanted to be left alone. Adrien gives based on what people need of him. He can joke around if Ladybug needs cheering up, or he can be super encouraging and patient at her lowest points. My point is, he'll be what a person asks of him to be, and he never struggles with understanding that. Marinette, on the other hand, has all the love in the world to offer and so absolutely wants to share it, even if that's not quite what the person needs. Juleka stated that she wanted to be alone, and Marinette kind of zoned out and texted the class. That's because she thinks that when someone is upset, they automatically want their friends to comfort them. She projects what she expects of people when she is upset. Marinette is an extrovert, and so being around people is comforting, but not everyone is an extrovert. Adrien is an introvert, and so understands on a personal level that the best company is, well, yourself. Until you're ready to be around people, of course. It's not like Marinette didn't respect Juleka's wishes or her intentions came from a bad place. It's the same way when Rose sneezed, Marinette panicked and forgot that her and the class promised Rose not to treat her any differently than they did before, because of her illness. Adrien was the only one who remembered that because he can put himself in Rose's shoes and understand based on his personal experiences that being treated differently from how others perceive you is frustrating. Adrien being empathetic and Marinette being sympathetic helps them in different situations. Marinette may not be able to connect with someone personally, and that's okay because she's able to connect with everyone without any attachments, hence her big speech in Origins. That's what makes her a good leader, and it makes Cat Noir a caring hero. Additionally, another way they mirror each other is how they treat being a superhero. Being Ladybug is a burden for Marinette, whilst Cat Noir is an escape for Adrien, often why he's always joking around, whereas Ladybug is occasionally very serious. Marinette never really asked for this because she was thrown into it, and she didn't really have much of a choice. Even when she tried walking away, the role of Ladybug was practically calling her. I will say, as the series progressed, Marinette may not fully realize it, but Ladybug is probably the best and worst thing that's happened to her. Best because she's growing in confidence, and for the longest time she's had very, very low self-esteem, but worse because no amount of responsibility that comes with being a hero should be placed on a 14-year-old. It's also mirrored in how their suit looks. Marinette was terrified and didn't want this, which is why her suit is fairly plain, whereas Adrien transformed for the first time and looked like he'd been doing this his entire life, which is why his suit is a bit more detailed, because he chose to be a superhero, even if it wasn't initially his choice. You can't deny that both Adrien and Marinette have discovered more about themselves than they'd ever discover if they weren't given the role of being Paris's protector. All of these characteristics I've mentioned in this video aren't just limited to Marinette and to just Adrien. Like I said, it's easier to list off the differences than their similarities, but they are there, and I hope everyone can see that from some of my points. To conclude this long video essay and to reiterate, mirroring traits aren't always direct opposites. Yin and Yang are opposing yet complementary forces. Both of them need each other to grow from one another and embrace qualities that the other possesses, in which they too possess but fail to realize they do. For example, Marinette can learn to be more empathetic and Adrien can learn to think with his mind more. Both, however, are selfless teenagers who are learning as the series progresses. They balance each other out in the sense that when one struggles with something, the other will always be equipped with a solution that pertains to their specific strength as a character. A partnership is a two-way street. One person is not going to have all of the answers. Marinette is the yin to Adrien's yang, and Adrien is the yang to Marinette's yin. Both of them bring something to the table that makes them such a dynamic duo and has them always coming out on top. But now I want to hear your thoughts. What did you think of this video? Feel like I've left something out and there are other ways Adrien and Marinette mirror each other that I haven't mentioned? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe if you're new here and give this video a like. But as for today, that's it from me, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!